And what's your pleasure?
From the Thomaston Place Auction Galleries in Thomaston, Maine, I'm Elizabeth McLeod with Auction Waves.
32,500, 100,000 there. Players all over the house, 400,000 on this rare piece, and 600,000, 900,000, 1 million, 1,175 once, 100 million, 175 twice. We all good? Sold.
There is no subject so old that something new cannot be said about it. Dostoevsky says so, and it's words to live by for anyone in our line of work. Here at Thomaston Place Auction Galleries, we of the staff find ourselves every day surrounded by objects with a history, and every day we notice something that wasn't there before. That's never been more true than over these past few weeks, as we've filled the galleries with more than 1,500 fascinating items up for bid in our biggest ever 4-day 2025 Summer Grandeur auction. On this edition of Auction Waves, we'll take a close-up look at some of the most exciting features of this auction. But first, a special edition of Auction News. Previews are wrapping up this week for our Summer Grandeur auction, and you'll find enthusiastic auction participants visiting our galleries with notebooks in hand as they give careful examination to each item on their bidding list. Our courteous auction team is also on hand, ready to answer questions about the items and our bidding procedures. And of course, each of us here have our own thoughts on the items that pass before us on their way to the auction block. In this auction news segment, we'll ask just which items members of our team would personally love to own. Our first step is the front desk, where Edie Davis holds forth as your initial point of contact with the galleries, whether by phone or in person, and her top choice in this auction is nothing less than a motor vehicle of utmost majesty, as she imagines rolling forth in a 1989 Daimler Model DS 420 limousine. Now, where would you take it if it were yours?
Anywhere and everywhere. I would go all over the place.
It's truly a motor car of distinction, coming to auction from the personal fleet of television legend Sally Jessy Raphael. This vehicle is a fine example of the classic Daimler style that made the DS 420 the choice of monarchs and heads of state, titans of commerce, stars of stage and screen, and connoisseurs of the utmost in refined, dignified automotive luxury. Consider your own bid on this masterwork of the automaker's art. You'll find it listed in our online catalog during Day 4 as lot number 4006. Over in the shipping department, David Ezzy's pick is a uniquely versatile item of furniture. Lot 3189, a petite yet functional 1920s writing desk.
We all have tables and counters covered in ephemera in our kitchens, and this is something that would look good doing it. And cute as a button.
Designed in the Regency style in fine figured walnut veneer, with a unique brass-fenced top gallery and 5 drawers to store your pens, your ink bottle, and perhaps your latest billet doux, this desk would make a welcome addition to any room. And over in the marketing office, Jamie Timms, our man about the world of fine art, has his eye on lot 3190, an exquisitely bound first edition from 1832.
Lot 3190 is a rare deluxe first edition of one of the great illustrated works of the 19th century. It was published in London in 1832 by Moon, Boys and Graves, print sellers to the King. This remarkable 2-volume set is titled Picturesque Views in England and Wales, with drawings by the renowned English Romantic painter J.M.W. Turner. The volumes feature 60 exquisite steel engravings, accompanied by descriptive and historical text by H.E. Lloyd, both with the title Esquire. In 19th century England, Esquire was a courtesy title used for men of good social standing, and was considered a rank below a knight, but not above a gentleman.
Well, this is certainly a noble-looking book.
And it captures the landscapes of 2 countries which I share a personal connection.
A masterpiece of the 19th century bookbinder's art, this impressive volume deserves pride of place on the finest personal library table. And what about my own pick? Well, that's a tough call. I've long been fascinated by the ashcan school of American art, that 20th century movement built around an unprecedented approach to urban realism, and we feature a true masterwork in that genre in Lot 3114 by founding member of the ashcan school Everett Shinn. Created to illustrate an article on the changing face of New York City appearing in the November 1900 issue of Scribner's magazine, the painting depicts an everyday scene in turn-of-the-century Greenwich Village in a style that's both engaging and a little bit haunting. Another painting that caught my eye in this auction is a work by one of Maine's leading 20th century painters, Waldo Pierce, whom I remember personally as a larger-than-life local character in the Searsport of my childhood. Lot 4344 from the Lindebeen estate is a winsome portrait by Pierce of a pigtailed little girl in a pale blue dress sitting in a spindleback chair holding a rubber ball. Well, that little girl, when she grew up, was someone I actually knew. I knew her whole family. Her sister was my mother's best friend. So you can imagine the looks that go through my mind as I look at her portrait, hanging here in the gallery. There are plenty of items in this auction that grab my attention. Brooke Astor's personal collection of books from her Cove End summer estate, each inscribed with her name and perhaps the month and year she read them. A rug that would be perfect for my newly painted bedroom. A 1939 Citroën Avant Traction that would look mighty good in my driveway. But I think my favorite item in this auction is one I've gotten acquainted with during our previews. It's something I never knew existed. It's lot number 2043, a Yamaha C2 Disclavier grand piano, equipped with the Mark IV computerized player system. That's the piano itself playing for you right here in our gallery. But it doesn't use punched paper rolls like the player piano your grandmother might have owned. This piano operates from computer disks inserted in a port beneath the keyboard, and the data read off those disks tells the piano what to play, exactly as the original file was recorded by a master pianist. It comes with a selection of discs containing a fine assortment of classical music, popular melodies, and show tunes in styles to fit any mood. Now, being a grand piano, it would never fit in my pump organ-sized living room, but it just might fit in yours, and if it does, I know you'll love it as much as I do. It's one of more than 1,500 fascinations you'll find over the 4 days of our Summer Grandeur auction, and as you bid, all of us here in the gallery will be dreaming right along with you. This is Auction Waves, and I'm Elizabeth McLeod. Touring our Summer Grandeur auction during our preview sessions is like touring 3 centuries of American culture, with a strong emphasis on Maine's place in the world of fine art. During our recent Gala preview event, a capacity audience of collectors and connoisseurs gathered at the gallery to hear Dr. Dan O'Leary, former director of the Portland Museum of Art, discuss outstanding works coming to the block from the Lindebeen collection on the concluding day of our auction, Sunday, August 31st.
Well, I'm going to talk about the Wyeths, William Thon, and Lindebeen. And this, therefore, is a story in many ways about Port Clyde. And in fact, Port Clyde is a mainstay of Maine art and American art that very few cities could rival or surpass. But to tell that story, I have to step back to N.C. Wyeth, because an amazingly fortunate thing happened. N.C. Wyeth, of course, had a very successful career in illustration, and he had a studio and home at Chadsworth in Pennsylvania, and he had 5 children. And his youngest child, Andrew, showed such capability in the field that his father excelled in. Then N.C. started to train Andrew, and Andrew Wyeth was homeschooled. He never really left home because he received such a foundation for his life at Chadsworth. And his talents, which were certainly going to multiply and he was going to excel, might not have had anything to do with Maine, except that fortunately for all of us, N.C. Wyeth came to Port Clyde in the summertime. So Andrew Wyeth started to come to get in the car with the dogs and the other kids and N.C. and his wife and drive up from Pennsylvania every year and stay at 8 Bells, that wonderful house in Port Clyde. When he was quite young, Andrew Wyeth courted and fell in love with Betsy James, married a Maine woman, I believe, And so that sort of anchored him in our territory. And the next 60 or so years of Andrew Wyeth's life really flowed from that beginning. And I'm so pleased to have this particular painting here to talk about this. This is called A Threatening Sky. It's a very loosely, creatively painted watercolor. It's in, I think, quite fine condition, and it seems to be dated 1938. That means Andrew Wyeth was 21 years old when he painted this painting. It's a masterpiece. The interesting thing is that when he was 20, in 1937, he had a show at the Macbeth Gallery in Manhattan, and there were 22 paintings in the show, and all 22 sold. I'm looking at Kali, and she's shaking her head. Imagine selling everything in your show. So at 20 years old, N.C. Wyeth saw that his son had almost a magical future. I think it was Life magazine that reviewed the show and declared that this was the next Winslow Homer because of the watercolor technique. And so when I first saw this painting online, I wondered if this was one of the Macbeth original 22. And it's not, but it was painted just 1 year later, so it is very much in the same fluid and beautiful mode as the ones that launched his career. And it is Port Clyde. So it grounds us in this place, and it happens to be the place that William Thon chose for his career. I probably thank myself for my good fortune dozens of times that in the year 2000 I organized a show of N.C. Wyeth's paintings, and I chose to show the paintings that he painted in Maine. We called it Precious Time because N.C. Wyeth had spoken about how precious the time was when he could drive up here in the summertime with his family and paint. And he painted landscapes. So this was the side of N.C. Wyeth that most of America did not see because he always had a somewhat uncertain attitude about his landscapes. He was very confident of his illustrations, and of course the Custer's Last Stand in this auction is an example of that. But the landscapes were private. And when this show opened, the museum actually had had a series of very difficult years, and so we were really trying to build audiences, build donors, build membership, and I knew the N.C. Wyeth show was going to be a tremendous success. And Andrew Wyeth, whom I had not met at that time, and Betsy called and said they would like to come down with Jamie and see the show. And it was a love fest. It was so, imagine how joyful it was for me to be able to take the Wyeth family through a show of N.C. Wyeth. They wanted to come on a Sunday, I think. It was a day that I knew was going to be extremely busy. And I thought, oh, the Wyeths, people are going to stampede them. It's going to be impossible for them to enjoy the show. And so I hired a very large security guard and coached him that his job was to walk discreetly alongside of Andrew Wyeth and keep people from bothering him. So here I am escorting the Wyeth family through the show, and they're saying, Jamie's talking to his father about all these memories of his grandfather and Andrew's father. It's just wonderful. And the guard is doing his job, and I'm congratulating myself that it's just such a success. And a very charming, discreet, soft-spoken woman approached Andrew Wyeth. And the guard froze and looked at me, and I looked at him, and she said, "Sir, I know we're not supposed to bother you, but I can't resist. I've just got to ask." And Andrew Wyeth, who's a charming man, smiled and said, "Yes, please." She said, "Which one is your favorite?" And so Andrew Wyeth took her by the hand, walked her over to the west wall of the largest gallery, and said, "I have to say that this one is my favorite and maybe the greatest painting ever made in Maine." And that painting was called Black Spruce Ledge. And I, at that moment, was quite happy because I had put it on the cover of the catalog, which we were selling in the store. But the real pleasure it gave me was that this painting belonged to Linda Bean. And Linda Bean and I wrote this catalog together. Her name is with mine in the credits. And by this time, she owned year 2000, so it's 25 years ago, Linda owned at least 10 very fine Andrew Wyeth paintings alone. So I had the pleasure of telling Linda Bean that her painting was Andrew Wyeth's favorite painting by his father. And imagine the goodwill that generated with Linda. And Linda, as this show shows, Linda was a wonderful collector. And you have to have it, you need funds, of course, but you have to have vision and enthusiasm to be a really wonderful collector. And Linda Bean certainly had more enthusiasm than just about anyone I've ever known, and particularly for N.C. Wyeth and Andrew Wyeth. They were deities to Linda, and right to the end of her life, Linda searched for the next great Wyeth painting that she could acquire. And then something happened that Kaja knows more about than I do, but that is, I think, one of the great parts of this Port Clyde and Maine story about these three people. And that is this: when Linda realized that she was dying in a hospital in Boston, she hired a helicopter and had herself flown back to Clark Island so she could die on the island and have her funeral there. And Clark Island is the site of the great N.C. Wyeth painting, Island Funeral. So Linda Bean, after having lived decades of forming her success as a collector by really focusing on the Wyeths, orchestrated her passing to recreate an N.C. Wyeth painting. I can't imagine. I know of no parallel achievement by a collector, and I'm sure the Wyeth family treasures this. So that was my opening to Linda Bean, and I felt very, very fortunate. And she was, anyone who knew her knows that she smiled all the time. Linda was the most upbeat, positive person. And I needed to raise money to restore Winslow Homer's studio at Prout's Neck. And of course, she was one of my targets or hopeful donors. And I went up to Port Clyde. Everything seems to happen in Port Clyde, by the way, in this story. And I'm not a particularly aggressive fundraiser. I'm anxious, I suppose. And I'm sitting in her Jeep after I gave her a tour the week before of a Homer studio and sent her some materials. And she turned to me, she said, "Well, Dan, what would you like me to do for your campaign?" And I thought, oh my God, no one ever asked, and it gives you an opening like that. And I thought, oh, Linda, thank you. I was hoping that you would give us $1 million. And she said, without even thinking, she said, well, I'll do that. I've never seen anyone so ready to be helpful. So my memories of Linda are a great collection of experiences and seeing these paintings. And many of them I had not seen. Some of them I have. In fact, I think I saw this painting in a house at Port Clyde near the water, on the water, and I was there for lunch. And there were 3 really fine Andrew Wyeth watercolors in the living room. And Linda said, Dan, I don't use this house very much, and I met a couple last week who have lost their home in Virginia, I think. And I said, well, why don't you just come up? And she didn't know them. I mean, these were new acquaintances. And so she was going to give them the house until they could sort of bounce back on their feet. Her husband lost his job, too. So I thought, wow. And so I'm thinking like a museum director, and I'm looking at these Wyeths, and I say, well, we could store the Wyeths for you in the museum. I wasn't trying to get her to give them to me, just I was worried about them being protected. And she looked at me as though she was puzzled, and she said, no, I want them to be able to enjoy the Wyeths. And it was just astounding to me, because she really didn't know them, but her attitude was, I think she just expected the best of people. And it worked out fine, but I worried about it the whole time. Well, the nice thing about being a museum director is that you do meet people, and many of the people in this audience I've had a chance to meet before, and it's great to see you again. And one such person was William Thon. So Linda had many more Thons than I realized, but I do remember this one, and this is called A Cold Sun, and it is a quintessential William Thon. And William Thon was born in 1907, 10 years earlier than Andrew Wyeth. Had an interesting early career, had a success in Manhattan, but decided to move with his wife Helen to Port Clyde. He had won a fellowship to Rome at the American Academy, and so there is an interesting phase in his paintings of Italian cityscapes and landscapes, and some of those are in the auction. But William Thon really became a dedicated Maine artist and carved a place for himself. And very late in his life, he called me to come up to his house at Port Clyde, his house and his studio. And I was curious about what it would be. And by this time, of course, Linda Bean owned this painting. And I should pay a little more attention to it. It has this kind of haunting, visionary use of light and darkness that Thon enjoyed. There are paintings that border on surrealism. I've never asked him about that. There is a measure of abstraction, of course. And more than anything else, he was independent. Thon, his watercolors in particular, used techniques he never explained to anyone. They had this kind of soapy, mysterious filament that he could layer over things. And actually, one of our really excellent curators, Jessica Nicol, and I were visiting the Thons, and she asked him how on earth he got this marvelous technique in his watercolors. And he looked at her and he said, well, young lady, you're a very young curator, so I won't blame you, but an artist never reveals his secrets, you know. I mean, it just was out of the question that he would discuss how he did this. So William Thon called me. I was very curious about what it would be. And by this time, William Thon was suffering seriously from macular degeneration. His eyesight was so compromised, but he was courageously unwilling to show the slightest sign of it. I would meet him at an opening, and he would hold forth in front of a painting, and I knew, actually, that he really couldn't even see the painting, but it didn't keep him from being just excellent. So I was very curious. Why was I going up to Port Clyde from Portland? And William Thon said, a young man, and I was like 55 at the time, so I thought that was nice, how much would it cost to endow a biennial at the Portland Museum of Art? And I learned that William Thon's final wish was to create an opportunity to have the same life that he had enjoyed in Maine for younger Maine artists. And he wanted it to be jured, and he wanted it to be a biennial. And so I had no prepping for this. I had no idea that's what he wanted. And any of you who knew Helen Thon was a no-nonsense person. So I'm looking at William Thon and Helen, and they expect an answer. So I quoted a rather low number because I was thinking to myself, well, it's only every 2 years, so the endowment would accrue not just 5%, but 10% of the endowment over the 2 years, more or less. And a biennial is not expensive. It's work, but it's not, you don't have a lot of shipping. The artists bring the art in mostly. So I quoted something like $400,000. And he looked at me, he's a very thoughtful guy, and he said, I don't think that will be a problem. And 2 years later, William Thon died, and we did a biennial to show him what it would be like. And he left $40,000 to a Maine Eye Institute, because here was a man who very much hoped that something could be done about macular degeneration. And he left us almost $2 million. So what that said about his desire, what this man wanted for Maine and for Maine artists, and he would talk to me about it. He said, Dad, now, when the jurors come to town, drive them around Portland and show them the art scene, you know. And he just had all these ideas that he wanted his biennial to do. He left us his home, his investment portfolio, which was over $1 million, all his art, all the possessions in his house, which Kaja sold. I really don't know of an artist who was more marvelously generous and single-minded in his philanthropy. Many of you will know that the Portland Museum of Art has abandoned the biennial, and I have complained to the Attorney General, and I consider it a staggering failure of honorable behavior. And I think before we're through, we're going to reinstate the biennial, because that's what William Thon expected us to do. I guess that's my storyline. I'm going to watch every single object as it sells, everything that belonged to Linda Bean, everything and there are lots of Wyeths and lots of Thons. I'm sure many of you will be as intrigued as I will be. So thank you very much for letting me share all these reminiscences with you.
We thank Dr. O'Leary for permission to include his comments in today's edition of Auction Waves. Meanwhile, fine furniture from the private collection of Linda Bean is also a marquee attraction for our Summer Grandeur auction. And at our gala, our auctioneer and CEO Kaja Veilleux gave us a guided tour of his own picks as the prize furniture lots of the auction. Lot 3076 is a rare Dunlap two-part Queen Anne chest. Lot 3113 is a rare 18th century highboy from the prominent Nichols family of Boston. And we begin with an 18th century Boston Chippendale desk in the desirable Bombay shape.
This piece right here, we are so excited to have because there was a Boston cabinet maker that was influenced by the 18th century Dutch cabinet makers who did these Bombay-sided pieces of furniture, chest and desk. There's only about a handful of these pieces of furniture in the world, made in Boston. This particular piece is so exquisite in form. It not only is Bombay, but it's shaped in the front. It has extenuating ball and claw feet that are exceptionally carved. But what makes it even better is when you open the lid, it has this incredibly shaped amphitheater interior, as it's called. It has fan carvings just to add to the glory of the interior of this desk. Secret compartments. These columns pull out, and then you can hide money in there. Years ago, when I was a lowly picker in Skowhegan, Maine, we used to go down east finding stuff. And one day, we were in Steuben, Maine, and knock on the door and cold turkey and say, "Do you have anything old you'd like to sell?" And people would sometimes say, "Yes, come on in," and sometimes they would say something that wasn't very nice. However, this one woman had this very large outhouse. And I said, "Do you have anything old in the house?" She said, "No, but in the outhouse, there's an old desk." Not like this, but a slant lid desk. They had two of these columns. And I said to her, "Do you know that those are secret compartments?" She said, "No." So I said, "Watch this." And I tried to pull one out, and it was stuck. So we there was another picker with me, and we finally pulled it out, and it was filled with, both of them were filled with 18th century hand-printed tobacco currency by Benjamin Franklin and others that were worth lots more than the desk ever thought of being. So we said to her, "Is it possible to buy this desk?" And she said, "No, it's been out in the outhouse all these years, and I think it should stay there." I couldn't believe it. We did get the money, though. So we got the colonial money, but she wanted the desk to stay there. And it's just one of the many stories of my 56-year career in doing this business. And as I tell people, you know, we're not really here to sell this stuff. We're here to have people pay for it so it'll be saved. Basically, that's what we're doing. We're all about preservation. And, you know, they've been doing auctions since Roman times. They have been doing auctions for that many years. Another quick story. I got a call to go down and do an appraisal in Boston, down by the water. This very wealthy family who was one of the people that helped finance the building of Boston, their family. And right by the bed, the old guy had a chest like this, a Bombay chest. And on top of it was all his prescriptions and drinks and other stuff. And I said to him, "You know, that's a very, very valuable chest. I don't think you should have it there." At the time, we didn't have the auction hall, so I was very friendly with the Keno brothers. I called and I said to Lee, I said, "You know, this fellow has a Boston Bombay chest, and I think it's something that you could sell, we could sell together." Anyway, we sold it for $500,000 40 years ago. And it wasn't as nice as this. Anyway, just to give you an idea of the value of these rare, rare pieces, this is really for somebody that's an astute collector or even possibly a museum. Over here you have, of course, these were all Linda Bean's. She had incredible taste, and of course she had the finances to be able to afford these wonderful things. This piece right here, as you saw on the back wall over here in the first bay, is a very rare two-part Dunlap, and this was a family that made this exquisite New Hampshire furniture, and you can always tell their stuff because a lot of their pieces, this is a chest on chest, they also made highboys, it has that what they call a mustache at the bottom on the carving. You see the curlicues here? They call it a mustache carving, is a sort of a nickname that the trade has given that. It also has this incredible in and out carved molding and dental molding on the top. It's partially tiger maple, but it has this wonderful soft red stain, and of course it has the pad feet on it, which makes it Queen Anne, which is about 1740. And the condition's amazing, and I'm sure that Linda had to give a lot to get that, but this is an exceptionally rare piece. So one of the things we're excited about this sale is not only do we have so much quality, but the pieces we have, you'd have to go to the Metropolitan Museum to see, or the Boston Museum to see. Here you can look at them, you can touch them, and you can buy them. I like the museums, but as I say to my wife, I want that, they won't sell it. So this piece here, this was in Linda's house in Bruce Head. This piece here, another exceptional piece of American quality furniture from the 18th century. So starting at the top, you have a broken arch pediment with a sealed back, which is very typical of the Massachusetts area. You have these great barber pole twist carved finials. Coming down, you have the shape in here. These are all raised panels. Then you come down the drawers, fluted quarter columns on both casements. As you lift this off, it's two pieces. And down at the bottom, you have these nicely shaped OG Chippendale bracket base. So this piece would have been made in Boston around 1775, or in New England, I would say. We can't be sure it's Boston, but it looks like a Boston piece. Anyway, these were some of the treasures that were in the house in Spruce Head. Some of the other furniture that we have in the sale, we have things that are from the Victorian era. We have things from the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. The one thing I like about our sales is that we try to have so much diversity that everybody likes to see the stuff. And that's what it's really all about. We have collectors from all over the world now. We're an international company, and people come. I mean, the last sale we had thousands of bidders from 25 countries. This sale should draw even more bidders, we hope, because the quality of the things are so diverse and so interesting and valuable.
From fine furniture to fine art to unique objects you never knew existed, all coming to you over 4 unforgettable days on the Maine coast, and all coming to you from Thomaston Place Auction Galleries. I'll be there, we'll all be there, and we'll all be looking for you. Learn how to register and view our catalog at thomastonauction.com. And we just have time to remind you that Tishri Dobson is at the piano for us today. Dave Allen, when he isn't hard at work on the graphics, strums the guitar. And the entire program is produced, written, and edited for you by yours truly, Elizabeth McLeod. Wishing you smooth sailing and happy bidding for Auction Waves. Auction Waves is an exclusive presentation of Thomaston Place Auction Galleries in Thomaston, Maine.